Dan, you're very, very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. I have been following your work for years, and I am truly delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Brendan. Nice to connect with an Irish person.
Great, yeah.
I grew up. Sullivan obviously gives it away, but we have a background. Everybody in my ancestry came over during the potato famine in the 1850, what you're doing, I think, is a tremendous breakthrough for entrepreneurs. Podcasting is like having your own radio station worldwide. And it's entrepreneurs that I'm noticing taking advantage of podcasting, and it's a wonderful gift. And that and Zoom have been a tremendous jump. You talk about scalability. Well, you scale globally with podcasts and with Zoom. And if you put the two of them together, it's even better.
I completely agree. It's been one of the gifts coming from COVID, our willingness to embrace technology, and my ability to access incredible people like you. I'd never planned to be a podcaster, but I fell in love with the value of podcasts probably about 6 or 7 years ago, and I couldn't believe what I was listening to for free. So certainly whenever I arrived at a point where it was about serving others and giving back, it's something that I felt I had to get over the fear initially of what's my voice going to sound and all of that good stuff. But you've kindly referenced our own purpose, and I appreciate that, the acknowledgement. Our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of SMEs to scale with purpose. So Dan, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
Yeah, well, we approach it a bit differently than some of the scaling programs that I've seen, in the sense that it starts entirely with the entrepreneur. Okay, one of the fundamental structures of our program, Strategic Coach, is that entrepreneurs do what they do for the sense of increased freedom in their life. Okay, and there's 4 freedoms: freedom of time, freedom of money, freedom of relationship, and then freedom of purpose. So in our program, we have individuals who are in the business, so everybody's experienced. Everybody is experienced, and we have minimum requirements. First of all, they have to have been through 3 years of successful entrepreneurial business. So we don't start people off as entrepreneurs. There's lots of programs out there that do that. But what we're looking for is someone who's really successful, really talented, but they have an ambition, obviously, to go bigger with their revenues, turnover, and do you use turnover?
Absolutely, turnover, revenue, yeah, same, interchangeable.
And also the profitability. That's the big thing. And so what we do is we get them really, really focused, and we have a interesting concept which we call the best decade ever. And what you do is you look at your whole life. So I'm in May I was 79, and I was looking back to when I turned 70, and the amount that I've created and produced just in my part of the company is greater than everything I produced and created before 70. So just the last 9 years. So we get them to do that because I have a rule that you can't encourage someone, you can't really focus someone on a bigger future until you give them a better past. Okay.
I want to get into that because You have written a wonderful book. I have a copy here. For those that are listening, you'll not be able to see this. 10x is easier than 2x. I'm a huge fan of The Gap and the Gain also here, and Who Not How, which I just love that concept. I want to touch on some of those things today as we go through the podcast and really deliver a masterclass distilling the learnings from the 79 years in the next hour. 10x is easier than 2x. How world-class entrepreneurs achieve more by doing less. I mean, ultimately, this is the holy grail, but it's a really contrarian view of how we should get there. I'm curious, before we get into practically applying it, is how did you become convinced of this?
Well, we've done it. I mean, in the company. So we started the program version of the company in 1989. So we're in our 34th year. And but before that, my background, I was a copywriter and layout artist for a big global ad agency, BBDO. And but this was the Toronto branch. I'm American to start with, but I moved to Toronto in 1971. So I've been here 52 years in Toronto, and I was working at the ad agency, but I could see this would not be a lifetime activity. And it's really the only job I've ever had in my life. And so, but what I've had since I was a kid is an ability to engage with adults. And I grew up on a farm where I didn't have any playmates until I was 6 years old, first grade of school. And right around that time, I came up with a question which just opened the adult world to me. And I would say, when you were my age, so I'm talking to people who are 50, 55 years old, when you were 6 years old, what was going on in the world? And I could get them talking for a half hour, an hour. And, these are mostly men, but I talked to women too. Mostly men who had been through the First World War. They had been through the Spanish flu epidemic. They had gone through the Depression. They'd gone through the Second World War. So they just had amazing, this is real history. I mean, these people had seen an enormous amount of history. And then I would just ask them questions about their answers when they would, how could you be on a farm when you didn't have any electricity? What was your first plane flight? When did you take your first flight? And what I was doing, I was creating their history so that I could understand it. But I was also, they had never thought about the answers that they were giving to my questions. And I began to realize there's an enormous power in questions. Okay. And generally, if you ask somebody a question about their life, they've not actually thought of the answer until they're giving it to you. And therefore, it comes out with a great deal of energy. And you can see they'd stop and they'd say, gee, I never looked at it that way before. And it occurred to me that we make up our past. I mean, we know we have to make up our future. We know we have to make up our future. So, and I'm not talking about making up the events. The events are the events, but your interpretation of the events changes. And so I could see, and my mother would get phone calls from some of them, and they'd say, Danny was over again. He was over again, and he gets me talking about things I've never thought about, and I feel better afterwards. And okay, so I say, I sort of had the business model when I was 6, but it took me about 30 years to figure out what the money-making model was till I was 30 years old when I started coaching. So even in my advertising work, I really preferred the clients who were, the owners of the company. We had a lot of small companies that get dragged along with various mergers, and they're fee-for-service clients. They're not the 17% media buy that most agencies use. So I wasn't talking to a middle manager or it's very, very hard to talk to people who are hired guns, okay, because they don't own the company. But if you talk to the person who owns the company, they can make decisions right on the spot. Better than that, they can write you a check right on the spot.
So true.
And so, I went through the normal kind of first number of years. I was bankrupt twice because of cash flow. And I went through a divorce. That I call that my practice marriage. And then in 1982, so that started in 74. In 1982, I met Bab Smith, who's my lifetime partner. We're married for 36 years and 37 years. And she's got the great gift of putting together teams. Okay, so we have a division of labor. I run the program and she runs the company. And, we started off with one or two team members and in 89. And now we're 130 team members. And I remember the first year of the program, we were 178,000. And this year will be 40 million.
Congratulations.
And we're in 3 countries. We have 18 other coaches. So I actually just use my experience of scaling to ask questions of the other entrepreneurs, but it's very, very personal. It's what is the freedom you're looking for? Especially the biggest one, it has to start with freedom of time. You got to use your time better. There's no increase of money until there's increase of freedom of time.
Well, this is what I want to come to, because this is the other paradox. It's, first of all, the contrarian thinking, or certainly when you state that 10x is easier than 2x, what you're saying, well, this is baked in your own experience, which is always the best place to come from in terms of your authenticity, your credibility, and the capacity for people to connect. What is paradoxical here is also that you cite that in actually having a 10x mindset, a 10x psyche, which is the first principle of our 10 principle scale X framework, having that 10x psyche will grant you these 4 freedoms, which you've alluded to: the freedom of time, the freedom of money, the freedom of relationships, and freedom of purpose. Again, these are all things that entrepreneurs that I speak to every day, they aspire to have. They may not have that language, but that's what they aspire to have when you start asking a few questions. Can you share with the listeners what those freedoms are in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, well, freedom of time it covers 2 categories. One is the time working, and then the time not working. Okay, so we put an enormous emphasis that in order to increase your success in the company, you've got to be spending less time in the company. Okay, so we have a time system: free days, focus days, and buffer days. And it's taken, I was involved in my 20s in the entertainment industry, and entertainers, whether it's actors or it's singers or athletes, because athletes are in the entertainment business, they have a completely different time system than normal people. Most of us, without giving it too much thought, actually live a bureaucratic time system. Okay, and what I mean that it's weekends and weekdays, and it's 9 to 5, and then you get some days that are vacation days, or you have holidays. But there's no interestingness in that time system. It's like, I'm 25 years old, and for the next 40 years, 50 years, whatever people are planning to do it, it's going to be the same time system. And entrepreneurs, at least in my acquaintance, in the entrepreneurs I have, there's a high degree of attention deficit disorder in my client base. Okay, and they really dislike doing repetitive activities. Like, they like doing something new, and they like to vary their time frame. But generally, if they're working in a structure that's sort of a corporate structure, that's fixed. That's almost like a straitjacket. They have a time, and it's almost impossible for them to free up time. So what we say is, you have 365 days, and those days can only be one of 3 kinds of days. A free day is when you don't work at all. Okay, And that means you don't look at your cell phone, you don't look at your computer, you don't read business books. And if you're enjoying free day activities, you don't engage in business activities. And this is a tough nut for a lot of entrepreneurs because they're hardwired that if they're not working, it's wasted time. So
I
I would,
completely agree. I almost think of the analogy as you're speaking, a limpet stuck to a rock. The limpet being the entrepreneur, the rock being the business, and you know what we're trying to do is encourage the limpet off the rock, but the limpet is habitually wired to stay stuck to the rock. And in those early days of scaling a business, you know that the psyche, the mindset is such. Well, I've got to do everything, and when I get habitually used to doing everything, then nobody does it better than
yeah.
me because I've done everything. So, you know, again, how do we wedge the limpet off the rock for them to understand that they will only achieve 10x if actually they give themselves this freedom of time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, first of all, there's four. I speak about the four freedoms, but with each of them, um, you know, you needed a new capability. Essentially, you need to have a free time capability, but you don't have that capability, so you have to make a commitment that you're going to do it. And so when our entrepreneurs come into the very first year of the program, we tell them there's going to be free days when there's no work. There's focus days where the only work you're doing is work that brings in money. And then we have a third day, which is called a buffer day. And a buffer day is a backstage day, to use theater terms. It's a backstage day. So going back to the entertainment model, entertainers have, I'll start with what they get paid for first. They get paid for performance, okay? So it's either the game, it's the match, or it's the concert, or it's the play. But, you know, and these are very, very concentrated, focused activities. And what they realize after a while, they actually get their results during the year in very, very short bursts of time. Okay. And so the money, getting the money actually doesn't take that much time. It's not getting the money that takes all the time.
uh,
Yeah. And so
share
they
more
think,
about
well, if
that.
I put in more time, I'll get more money. But in fact, just the opposite happens. They get tired out. They get, you know, and I mean, no entertainer could possibly do it every day, 8 hours a day. They couldn't be performing 8 hours a day. You know,
Yeah.
people become famous for what they can do in 3 hours a week on a Saturday.
Yeah, I love that. And I often, when I'm coaching the entrepreneurs going through their own program, I refer to them, reference them, and I certainly want them to see through a lens which elevates them to understand that they're corporate athletes. So, like that athlete analogy, you know, and in many respects, actually, you know, take a golfer. If he misses a putt, really, he might lose the big check, and his caddy, you know, might not get the bonus. You know, if the corporate athlete, the entrepreneur, isn't performing, there might be 50 people who he has directly employed dependent. Their partners, let's assume, another 50 people. Maybe they have an average of one kid. So all of a sudden, you have hundreds of people who are dependent on the fact that this person is not necessarily treating themselves as a corporate athlete. So we encourage them to build in free days, focus days, and backstage days. What is before we get into the other films, there's a line in your book, because this brings us back to identity. What we're asking them is to change the way they think.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a wonderful quote here. People are afraid to commit fully to the 10x process because it inevitably requires letting go of your current identity, circumstances, and comfort zone,
Mm-hmm.
which is what you've described. How do we transition them away? Because this is going to resonate with so many of our listeners. How do they, you know, unlimpet themselves and become corporate athletes?
Yeah. Well, I think the big thing is that you put it out in such a way that intellectually they grasp what the time system is. Okay, so I said, so you got 365 days. So for example, Babs and I, this is my wife and I, for 30 years, we take off 155 free days a year. That's the equivalent of 22 weeks, okay? And which means that every year we only have 210 work days, okay? Now the work days are focus days, which is the money-making day and the buffer. And we say, now this is the structure that's going to govern all your involvement in the Strategic Coach Program. And I said, it's your choice what numbers you want, but that means that I only have 210 days a year to actually get my entire entrepreneurial results. Okay, and your mind has to jump into, well, I can't, if I only get 210 days, I can't be doing this anymore, and I can't be doing. So the brain is very logical if you give it the restrictions. Okay, and actually, entrepreneurism is not thinking out of the box; it's thinking in a smaller box.
Tell me more about that.
Well, it's 210 days because most entrepreneurs give themselves 365 days to get their results. Okay. And they say, well, I don't even know what to do on a free day. And I said, right, because you've overemphasized one activity and one skill in your life. But would you be willing to have more free time? Okay. And not see it as wasted time, but see it as energizing time, so that when you come back, you get a lot more done in your focus days, and you need fewer buffer days. Okay, so that's the big thing. So it's a bit like like a mathematical proposition here. You got 365. In my case, I'm just using my own example here. And I have people in the program who take more free time than I do. I have people who take 2/3 of the year off, and they've organized the remaining work time to the point where they're doing only about 10% of what they used to do, but they do it deeply. You know, it's they're only there for they're only there for the exact hour or 2 hours where the results happen, and they get better and better. So what you have to do is get them committed to the model and say, look, you got all the time in the world ahead of you. Most of them are in their 30s or 40s. And I say, you got all the time in the world. I mean, just think of how much time you have. And if you're always getting better and you're always enjoying what you're doing more and more, how long are you going to work? I mean, if I get you to the top of your game and you're loving it and you're getting the best results you've ever had, when would you retire? Well, I wouldn't retire. And I said, okay, so let's take retirement off the board. You know, you're not spending your whole life working so you don't have to work. Why don't you spend your whole life working so that the work becomes more and more profitable, more and more enjoyable, and you've got a ton of free time at the same time?
So again, like this is music to my ears, and everyone who is listening has aspirations undoubtedly to achieve this. Before we jump into the other three freedoms, I'm keen for you to address how important then an understanding. So when we create some constraints, then it's an understanding of discerning what I'm really good at, yeah, where I really provide value. And
we call this unique ability.
So let's come to that. How do I, and there'll be a lot of listeners hearing this concept or this term for the first time, unique ability. Mm-hmm. How do the listeners discern what their unique ability is whenever they've got their hands on everything at the moment?
Well, there's a number of profiles from the outside we use, and I'd be happy to, describe them if you want, but we have 3 or 4 profiles, and these are by other companies. And what they are is to show you where your strengths are, And so I don't believe in working on my weaknesses. Okay. I only believe in working on my strengths. And therefore, other people have to do my weaknesses with their strengths. Okay, so for example, there's a profile called Colby. It's out of Arizona. And you take a whole series of questions. You can do it online. It's, you know, in the States, it's like $50. And you immediately get your results. And one of mine is you should never have Dan involved in any backstage activity whatsoever. You know, I mean, sirens go off if Dan is doing a backstage activity. Dan's a front stage. Dan should always be front stage, and I suspect that's true of you too, because you wouldn't be doing podcasting if you didn't have front stage inclinations. And so what we identify but I'm also very good at creating new concepts and new ideas. So since I was 70 years old, I've written 44 books.
That's just incredible. And
I write a book a quarter.
It's really challenging to get your head around that, but something as you're speaking, which again, I want to introduce this concept to our listeners who will be hearing this for the first time. So if you take where I came from previously, CEO of a company that scaled globally. We had offices in 6 continents, scaled to over, it was almost, $150 million, from 15 people to 700 people. It's an engineering business, and my background is in engineering, but I felt that as CEO, it was incumbent on me to actually understand engineering. So I initially started to explore going to night class to learn AutoCAD drawings. And then I realized the best that I could ever be going to night class.
As somebody you would probably fire.
Exactly this. So I thought, hold on, we have the best in the world. We have the best engineers in the world. Yeah. All I need to know is their number, where they're located. And if I'm going to a meeting that's going to need somebody who's very technical, I just need to bring Kevin or Dermot or Darren or whoever with me, which brings us to the point that when I understand as a leader and I discern what my unique ability is, then I start to
identify what other people
who, not hows. Yes. So can you jump in? And before that, Dan, actually, what I want to do is get into if you can speak to the desire of entrepreneurs to be in control, because clearly I was going to go to night class because I didn't want to feel embarrassed in meetings where there was engineering concepts being discussed and maybe I wouldn't understand the level of detail. So I really wanted to understand the level of detail that really I didn't need to understand because Kevin or Dermot or Darren or Michael did. So how do we kind of get, it's back to the identity. How do we get to the point where we're comfortable to let go and we discern our unique ability and we start to identify the who's?
Yeah. So we have this test, and then we have a process. It's called the unique ability process. And you write 10 letters or send emails to 10 individuals in your life, and it could be family member, it could be friend, it could be business associates that you know in the marketplace, even members of your own company. And you simply say, I'm going through a process here where I identify my unique ability. So what I would appreciate is you give your insights, that if you had Dan Sullivan doing his best work, what would that best work be? And then you take 10 reports, and they overlap by about 80%. People are actually, wouldn't you find that this would be true, Brendan, that it's easier for somebody else to see what you do great than you for yourself? And the reason is you're inside yourself, and there's just a lot of different activities going on, so it's kind of hard, but they experience you from outside. And they can, so you get these reports back, and you're kind of blown away. It's actually a very moving exercise. People find it very, how did they know me so well, But what you find is if you take all where they overlap, it's like a Venn diagram, okay? And in the middle, there's about 2 or 3 activities, and they wouldn't have you doing anything. So one of the things is you've got to believe other people's insight, but there are people whose judgment and discernment that you really trust, okay? And I mean, they've got the same problem as you do. They can't see their own unique ability, but
Yeah.
they can see yours. So that's part of the information. And then you take all your activities that you would do in a quarter. Let's take a quarter, and you break them down into 4 columns where you're clearly incompetent, you know, that you're doing something that's just incompetent. The next one would be competent, and let's use your CAD program. That let's say you've got enough skill with CAD that you could be competent, but as the as the MD, you're not really looking for competence in your company. You're looking for excellent skills, and you're looking for people who just are really unique in what they do. But think of the time you're spending learning a CAD program. You're either incompetent or you're competent, and you're spending all this time. And meanwhile, there's the time that you're spending that could be free time, or that could be you in front of someone and making a sale, or being with your best team leaders and getting them clear about what the next game is. So I often say that, and that's the second column. And the third column is excellent skills, but you don't really have a passion for them. Okay, so I'm a really good ad writer, I'm a good copywriter, and I'm a really good layout artist. But any time that I spend doing writing or doing artwork, is, from my perspective as the owner of the company, that's a misuse of my best abilities. Okay, so you have to develop a certain sense of depersonalization about that. You have to look at yourself as if you were looking at someone else and say, I don't think this person is properly focused. I don't think we've got them properly attached to the right things. And that process of depersonalizing it for yourself actually allows you to depersonalize it for everybody. Okay. But then the sweet spot, when you have those 3 columns filled in, competent, incompetent, competent, and excellent, you're only left with 3 or 4 activities, and say, how could I design my future so I'm only doing these 3 or 4 activities? So for mine, first of all, I'm a really great coach. I'm a really great coach, and I've coached 7,000 entrepreneurs since 1974. It'll be 50 years next year that I started. And I can sit and listen to someone, and they're talking about this and they're talking about that. And I said, you've talked about 7 things, but from my standpoint of what your energy is in talking about these 7 things, they aren't equal to each other. There's one that when you talk, I can see your eyes flashing. I can see there's a lot of energy, very exciting. And I said, what if you could just do that one activity all the time? Yeah. And if you weren't doing the activity, you were golfing, if you weren't doing that activity. So I see myself as a very specialized, unique ability, and I'm in a team of other people's unique ability. So in our company, all 130 of our team members have their own unique ability exercise. So all you're doing is linking one unique ability to another unique ability. Okay.
So I love this, and it's something again that,
and it's real simple. I mean, simple doesn't mean easy.
Well, what I say is simple scales, complex fields. I mean, we wrote the book Simple Scaling. It absolutely, people confuse simple for easy, but simple simply means uncomplicated. But to get to a point where things are uncomplicated, it takes a lot of work, a lot of discernment. And where I've come to in this is, we don't recognize our unique ability because it comes easy to us. And because it comes easy to us, we don't value it. And there's this, I think we're coming from this old paradigm where in order to go to work, it must feel like it's really tough and be a bit of a grind. And then we'll celebrate that grind at the weekend and we'll go back and we'll do the cycle again, as opposed to examining what it is that I am uniquely good at, that I love doing, and doesn't feel like work. Where I want to come to, Dan, I'd love to get.
I want to ask you a question.
Go 10
years. How old are you now?
I am 48.
40?
48. Yeah.
48. So let's go back to 38 and get a picture of yourself when you're 38 and all the things you're doing. What are the things that you thought were important when you're 38 that you wouldn't touch today?
My background's in finance. I thought, but I was the CEO of the business at that stage. I thought I needed to be all over the numbers, and I think that's important. But I needed to be all over the numbers. I needed to be all over the operations. I needed to be all over the sales. I had my fingers in lots of different things because I felt as an MD of the company, it was incumbent on me to know what was going on in every corner of the business. So that took a lot of time. In latter years, what I've come to understand is really, and in the latter years of our scaling journey, probably 70% of my time was spent with people, either trying to find great talent, develop great talent, coach great talent, understanding that really leveraging that talent was the key to scaling. Growing is doing more with more, scaling is doing more with leverage. And there was so much unlocked talent within the business that if I could just create the environment to unlock that talent, then ultimately we would achieve scaling. So I spent the bulk of my time with the talent within the business, as opposed to, and let the who's get at the recruit the best people, world-class people in each of their functions, show them a vision, communicate that vision often, and really let them get on with it.
Yeah. So you went, the company went from 3 million to 150 million, and you're worldwide. And I would say that your company went 50 times because Brendan went 50 times in the use of his talent.
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, because there's so
All the
many.
cues, all the cues in your company come from what you're doing with your time.
That's a real insight. So where then, what are the challenges for business owners? Let's take that, all of the cues in terms of scaling the company successfully come from how you use your time.
Yeah.
Where do leaders of businesses get tripped up here in the context of identity and use of their time and unique ability, all of those ingredients? Where do they typically trip up?
Yeah. Well, they think that control is the answer. So what we switch your thinking is that you're going to not be in control, but you're going to be in charge.
Tell me more about that.
Well, there's two definitions of charge. I mean, you can think of it from a military standpoint. The purpose of the commanding officer is to have great charges. Great charges. Charge! Like he doesn't say control. Yeah, but the other thing, there's an electrical definition of charge. Your job is to give a charge to the great talent that you have, and you to electrify it. Because 85% of the most talented people in the world can't give a purpose for their talents. But you're in a position to actually say, you are really great at what you do, and now I want you focusing on this. Because you understand the entire dynamics of the company. Okay, you understand all the different inputs and outputs that you have to be constantly growing and constantly more profitable. So my job is to constantly create new material, and so I've created around 250 thinking tools, and it's over a long period of time.
I want to come to that before we finish, by the way.
But these are all copyrighted. These are all trademarked, and now we're starting the process of patents. I think patent is the definition there, and we have 50 patents in process right now. And interesting thing, and this is news to almost every entrepreneur that I talk to. I'll give you a graph, and it's there in the United States. There's a magazine, and it's a service called Standard & Poor's, and Standard & Poor's evaluates the market valuation of a company. So let's say 1980. If you took the 500 corporations in the US and evaluated why they're valuable, 80% of that, 84% of that would have come from tangibles, buildings, property, equipment, inventory, everything that's sort of physical. And 16% came from intangibles, which were unique approaches, unique concepts, unique processes, innovative technologies. And last year, it was reversed. It was 84% intangibles and 16% tangibles. Okay. So I can tell right off the bat that you have a lot of ideas. You have a tremendous number of ideas for how things can work better, for greater value creation. I mean, if we're running out of sand, there's got to be a substitute. There's got to be a solution. To be fair for our listeners here, it's not just beach sand. It's there's particular types of sand, especially in the high tech world. As a matter of fact, the highest chips, which are basically made by TSMC out of Taiwan, all of their dust, if you will, quartz dust. That's really what sand is. It's quartz dust. Comes from one mine in a little town in North Carolina.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
But it's more valuable than anything that's ever been valuable on the planet. This sand. So I have to tell you, it's a good market to be in, and that's why you see the competition between countries right now, especially the U.S. And there's about 5 countries that are really masters of what you can do with sand: the United States, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and I think Holland. Holland is the other firm that's a country that really show up, and they do different things. They're part of the process. So going back to the thing, I think that what's happened to you in 10 years is that you become more the vision man in the company. You're the one who's giving them a big picture that all the talent in your company can actually be directed toward bigger and bigger results because the world is changing. There's all sorts of new opportunities. Okay. You can hire a numbers person. Okay. I had a client, this is really funny. He's a tremendous entrepreneur. He's in his 30s, late 30s, and he's got 4 or 5 companies. They're public companies. Okay. And he creates public companies and then he staffs them up. But he's been getting a lot of messages. He lives in Arizona, and he said, I've had 3 people say, would I be willing to go into politics and be the governor of Arizona? And I said, Scott, the way you're going, I said, I have to tell you, it's a lot easier to buy a governor than to be a governor. Why would you waste your time being governor when you can buy a governor?
And that's a whole different podcast. I want to pick up on something.
But guess what? That's how it actually happens.
The people listening will say, well, look, guys, that's fine for you. Dan, you've scaled your business to $40 million. You have 130 people, a wonderful team. Look, I'm stuck in the balls of my business at the moment, and you guys can go out in the market and hunt for great talent and pay great talent. But look, I'm in a scrappy phase here. I can't afford. So again, the contention that I get back is I can't afford the numbers person right now. So I've got to sit in the evening and put invoices on Xero or QuickBooks or whatever. I've got to jump in the van and deliver stuff. I've got to help with the install. Whatever it is, whatever their version of, I can't afford. I need to do that myself. What would you say to the person listening now and that thought is in their head?
Yeah. Well, one of the problems, it's almost impossible to make a decision in the present, okay? Because you're loaded. So what you have to do is pick a spot in the future and say it's 3 years down. And I like 3 years because it's the year after next. And once you get beyond 3 years, it's hard to visualize. It starts falling apart. So I would say 3 years from now, what are your existing results right now? you get their numbers right now. So I said, I'm going to take you 3 years in the future, and nothing's changed. You're still getting the same numbers 3 years from now. How do you feel about that? Oh, that'd be terrible. I'd say, so in order for it not to be this way 3 years from now, what's one thing right now you have to do? Okay. And then you just keep going back, and they say, well, I could get somebody in who could do 80% of the numbers. Okay. I say, yeah, I mean, there's really bright people, guys coming out of business college or the accounting firms, and they would come in and they would be devoted 100% to getting Brendan his numbers. And then Brendan is going to fine tune them and turn them into strategic messages and strategically. And all of a sudden you find out you just got 10 hours a week. I had a guy who was in a logistics business. Okay, but he did all the bids, okay. And I asked him, well, how much time during the year are you spending doing bids? And he said, I added it up, it's 1,200 hours. I said, well, that's a whack of time, isn't it? And I said, so what if there was a solution where, aside from training a new person, you didn't have to do any of the bids? And so we have a little tool, it's called the impact filter. And the impact filter is, you say, this is the result, free me up from 1,200 hours, okay? And why is this such a good project? Because then I could take the 1,200 hours and I could take 400 hours free, and I could take another 400 hours and be focused on expanding our biggest opportunities with our biggest customers, our clients, using our best talent. And I could do another 400 hours bringing in a new technology. Okay, so everybody's got a series of things they would do. And I said, so I could write it up, and what's the best result that can happen out of this? Gee, I would be totally freed up. I'd probably be easier to live with for my family. I'd probably be easier to live with inside the company. What's the worst result? That we're 3 years down the road and still the same. Now, I'm 3 years more bored. I'm 3 years more, burned out. And then you say, well, what are the 8 things that you have to do, the measurable success criteria that get you towards? And then let's break the 3 years down into 12 quarters. So what are you going to do during the first quarter? You can't do 3 years of quarters in one quarter, but what could you do in the next quarter? So now they're doing it. And so, and we work on a quarterly basis in Coach, and they come back, and he said, I put out this impact filter and I showed it to my team. First of all, you got to clue your team in on your plans. So I said, this is what I'm looking at. I'm looking to free up 1,200 hours. And within 30 days, somebody knew a young guy who was just graduating from business college, and his mastery in business college was doing bids. Okay. The guy came in and he was 10 times better than the entrepreneur, because there's all sorts of new apps and new technology that he knew, but he didn't. And he freed up 1,200 hours in 8 months.
Yeah. The appeal.
But again, the main point here is you can't make the decision in the future. You're surrounded by wild dogs.
Yeah, you can't make the decision in the present. It
has to be in the present. I mean, I had this is a great story. He's a doctor. He's a cosmetic surgeon. And he came up with a technology using visual reality, VR tools, of taking all the textbooks in medical college, which are still two-dimensional, they're just drawings on a page. And he just chose the inner ear because, plastic surgeons are using knives on people's face, and you can hit a particular nerve, and you might go to prison for it, but you're certainly going to get sued for it. Okay. And what he did is he created a VR where the inner ear, which is it's got about 17 different things. It's as big as a sugar cube, but he has a big room, and the student walks around inside the room, and it's triggered with audio, and they learn the complete thing. So anyway, he gets this and he shows it to a couple of medical colleges. And they said, God, when can we get this? So he had, and then the medical technology companies were coming to him and said, geez, when can we get a hold of this? He had $100 million of financing immediately. And he didn't come back. So he came back next 90. He was so excited. And he brought in and demonstrated to the other team members in the room. And they said, geez, yeah, yeah, I'm going to, they were so impressed. One of them said, I'm going to sue my parents for genetic malpractice. I can't do this. And so he came back and I said, so what progress? He says, there's some things here I'm not really, not really quite sure about. And then another 3 months goes by. And so he's now half a year out and he hasn't done anything with it. And so I've been coaching, for a long time. I've been coaching one-on-one and I've been coaching workshops for, at that time, probably 45 years. And I said to him, well, can I suggest what might be the problem? And he said, yeah, he said, I'd be happy to. I says, she can have 50% of everything up until now, but she can't have 50% of the future. Then he said, yeah, that's the problem. And I said, how long have you known this? And he said, 17 years. So I said, so let's go down the road 3 years. It's still the same 3 years. Is that okay with you? And he said, no. I said, 2 years. It's still the same. Is there any change?
Yeah.
Would that be okay? No. I got him down to the next 90 days. And he says it wouldn't be good if it was 90 days. And he launched the divorce papers on the next Friday.
And this is the point, it's back to that old cliche, and how at 48 years of age, I've come to discover that all of those things that I used to roll my eyes at whenever my mother said are so true. But, the Einstein quote that the definition of insanity is expecting a different result by trying to do the same thing. And, back to your point, Dan, the power of a great coach, the power of great questions can lead, and often does lead, the entrepreneurs to an insight for themselves that actually will change the trajectory of their life and their business. And so for completeness,
but here's another thing. I'm going to take you back to 38 again. Okay. And then I want you to document all the jumps and breakthroughs that got made over the last 10 years. And would you say it's the best decade you've ever had?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to take the next decade from 48 to 58, and we're going to say, based on what I already know, how to go, how to scale, now what am I going to refine to go to the next stage? But this time I'm going to divide it in two. It's creativity times productivity. Everything we're going to have to do where we're creating new things and we're becoming more productive. And technology is out there to support us. Really, really skilled people is out there, are really out there to support us. But then you say, how do I have to be fitter and healthier to pull that off? So now you got two tracks. You got the head for it. You got the talent for it. You got the ambition for it. But physically, you may not be in the proper shape to pull that off. So you got to move now. Because 48, I have to tell you, you're over the hump for most people are starting to decline physically and energy wise.
Yeah, I've that resonates as somebody who has trained all my life and who I identify as somebody who's healthy. In fact, my approach with all the entrepreneurs that I coach is lead self first before you seek to lead others, before you lead an organization. And back to the attitude, the lens of being a corporate athlete. I don't just mean in terms of being an expert entrepreneur. I mean in the context of being the best shape of your life if you're going to lead this organization up the summit from Scale Everest base camp to the summit of Scale Everest, as I use the metaphor. So you're certainly preaching to the converted here, Dan. And what I found in my 20s and 30s, all those little niggles that you just shook off, in your 40s, they no longer become niggles. You cannot ignore what your body's telling you. And I also, just on that point, I always use the analogy of the Airbus A380. I believe is the biggest passenger aircraft in the world. It holds about 500 passengers, and I invite entrepreneurs to think of themselves as the pilot of that Airbus A380. Now, the only reason people are on that plane is because you invited them onto it. You said, come with me, I have a vision of a new destination in a bigger land. The last thing they want to do is walk onto that plane and without having seen you before, is when they hit turbulence, is that the door busts open and you're in the worst shape of your life, that you emotionally you're unregulated, that you're having a full-scale argument with your co-pilot, and the hands are off the throttle, because at that stage you've got 500
and you're doing
passengers.
social media. Can you believe this? Can you believe it?
Yeah, so
what an a-hole,